Hi, in this new episode of our training, we're gonna talk about vocabulary teaching techniques. If English vocabulary is taught in an uninteresting way, such as by drilling, simple repetition, and learning lists, then the words are likely to be forgotten. But if the words are learned in a memorable way, they stick in the long-term memory of the student. When thinking about how to teach vocabulary, it's important to remember that learners need to have both active and passive vocabulary knowledge. Teaching passive vocabulary is important for comprehension. The issue of understanding another speaker requires the listener to have a passive vocabulary range. Active vocabulary contains the words a student can understand and use for production. Let's look at the methods for teaching vocabulary right now. One of the most recognized ways of introducing new vocabulary is using visual techniques. Teaching vocabulary can become much easier with the use of cards, pictures, images, diagrams, flashcards, and even real objects. In this way, words are remembered by their color or position, their association with other words, pictures, or phrases. If you prepare the words to be introduced in the session, you may save the images on your PC and show them to your students or use special apps. Creating semantic maps together better applies for a concrete vocabulary topic. For example, food, sport, etc. The purpose of creating a map is to visually display the meaning-based connections between a word or phrase and a set of related words or concepts. Semantic maps help students to identify, understand, and recall the meaning of words they read in the text. When teaching new vocabulary, the method of delivery needs to be fresh and interesting for the students, otherwise they will not remember the words. Ways in which to liven up the introduction of new English vocabulary could include brainstorming around the existing word in the student's vocabulary knowledge. For example, if you are learning the topic of traveling, you may ask something. What comes to your mind when you hear the word journey? Or what associations do you have with the word journey? That could work like a fine warm-up activity. Contextualize and personalize a new word. Require your students to use a given word in a sentence. First, of course, they need to understand the meaning of a word. Then they may apply this knowledge in real-life situations. Learners remember the words better if they have some personal significance or emotional connection. When presenting vocabulary, try to link them to students' own lives, interests, feelings, experiences. For example, if you are teaching the word patient, ask your learner, are you patient or impatient? When was the last time you were really impatient? How long are you ready to wait for a friend who is late? How can people become more patient? So repeated exposure to vocabulary in many contexts aids word learning. Students learn new words better when they encounter them often and in various contexts. Of course, reliance on images, real objects is limited, especially if it refers to abstract notions or super advanced vocabulary. An alternative to conveying the meaning of a new word is simply use a paraphrasing or clarifying the meaning. Providing several example sentences can serve a good option. For example, you want to teach the word fancy. Instead of giving the definition right away, you may create sample sentences. For example, he's really nice, but I don't fancy him. That's a fancy dress. I fancy eating out. Do you fancy a cup of tea? Then you may provide some synonyms, antonyms, give a full definition of the word, and of course, type it in a chat. A situational presentation involves providing a scenario that clearly contextualizes the target word. Here is a situation for teaching the words embarrassed, embarrassing. Kate saw a man at the bus stop. His back was turned, but she was sure it was her brother, so she tapped him on the shoulder with her umbrella and shouted at him. The man turned around. He was a complete stranger. She was terribly embarrassed, and it was a very embarrassing experience. Reinforcing a situational presentation with pictures or gestures make it more intelligent. A teacher may also tell own story when he or she was embarrassed and then invite a learner to do the same. Teaching individual words is not as effective as teaching collocations and vocabulary chunks. So, whenever you present a new word, try to teach it with the words it goes with. For example, to be angry with, a quick review, large quantity, strong wind, big mistake, and so on. We greatly encourage students' autonomy. So get your learner present new vocabulary by themselves. Assign learning new and interesting phrases for each session individually. You may recommend subscribing to Merriam-Webster Word of the Day and keep a record of newly studied words. Here are some general tips you need to bear in mind. Get students keep the record of vocabulary, so they should have a list of words, for example, they need to cover with their meaning, form, and pronunciation if needed. We need to try to provide multiple exposures to the word because it's really unlikely to expect the learner to use a new word right after they have learned it or heard for the first time in a session. New words are learned over time, but for this, we need to go back to them again. But don't overdo it. If you're aiming at teaching active vocabulary words that will be really useful for your learner in speaking, in productive experience, try to teach no more than 5-7 items in each session. It will be enough. Teach items early in the session when your learner's mind and thoughts are fresh. Encourage students to review what they have learned. You may recommend using apps like Babbel, Quizlet, and Duolingo, where in an interactive way, they can practice new vocabulary. Finally, do review activities with your learner. You cannot teach something in one session and never return to it. So on the following session, reuse the previously learned vocabulary. Try to do matching, fill in the gaps, crossword, or just sharing definitions with each other or creating sentences with the words learned before. Well, that's all for now. Please check out our next video with useful, practical exercises and interactive resources for vocabulary teaching. Thank you for your attention.